I am going to be telling you a scary childhood story. When I was 2 years old, my mom passed away. My dad wasn't in the picture, so I went to go live with my grandparents. My grandparents lived in a super old home that was built in the 1800s. I was a very imaginative child. So when I told my grandparents that I used to see people in the house, they just didn't believe me. There was one lady in particular that I would always see. She would sit at the end of my bed and watch me fall asleep. I wasn't scared of her because I thought she was an actual person. Plus, I was super little, so nothing even crossed my mind. At this point, I was like 4 or 5 years old. I remember her talking to me constantly. She even sang me the song Rockabye Baby to get me to go to bed one night. Every single day when I would get home, I could see her in my window. At that point, I thought she was just waiting for me. She just wanted to be my friend, right? But as I got older, things started to get really weird between me and her. She wasn't this nice lady anymore. Stay tuned for part 2. This is part 2 of the lady in my room who would sing me lullabies to get me to go to bed. No one else in my family could see her. She even told me that she was my mom. I really believed her. If you remember, my mom passed away when I was 2. So, it seemed pretty real that it was my mom. I didn't really remember what my mom's face looked like when she passed away. And this lady, could be my mom. She continued to sing me lullabies every single night when I would go to bed. She would always be waiting for me in the window when I would get home from school. But I figured out pretty quickly it wasn't my mom. My mom was a sweet, kind-hearted person. This spirit was evil. She would get mad at me every single time any of my friends would come over. She told me she could see my future and that I was going to go to hell after I died in a car accident. It scared me so much, but no one believed me. It got to the point where I never even wanted to go in the car because I thought I was going to die. She convinced me I was evil. Stay tuned for part 3 that's coming. This is part 3 of the lady who used to sing me lullabies to get me to go to bed. This spirit was evil, and she started to convince me that I was evil too. She convinced me that I would go to hell because I was a horrible child, even though I wasn't. She convinced me that every single person in my life hated me. She even started to control my dreams, and I would wake up every single night screaming at the top of my lungs from a night terror, and she would be sitting at the end of my bed. This went on for years. When I turned 9, my grandpa passed away. And because it was a really big house, me and my grandma moved to a different house. And the evil spirit was just gone. I never saw her again. But was she really gone? When I was 15, I went to a psychic. The moment I walked into the room, she could feel a dark energy enter the room. She told me that someone was following me every single step I took. And when she said that, I knew exactly what she was talking about. After that, I went to a medium, and after many sessions with her, the dark presence was finally...
When I was a freshman in high school, my family was going through a difficult financial time. We had to move to a smaller apartment in Boston so that we could afford living in the area. So we moved into this really small apartment, and the building where the apartment was in was really bizarre because it didn't even really look like an apartment building. It was technically an office building. We were on the 3rd floor, and then on the 2nd floor was a small law office. And then the weirdest one, on the bottom floor, which was really the basement of the building, was a massage parlor. None of the people who worked at the massage parlor spoke English. They were all young women, and the name of the parlor was Tulips Massage. Tulips, like the flower. Love those pink tulips. But it also most definitely had a double meaning. Like, she has 2 lips. Blech. So I was 14, and I would get home at like 3 and see these sketchy middle-aged men walking into the building. Nasty, dumpy, gross, sad, sad men. One time I walked home into the building, and there was this man standing at the entrance. And he gave me this weird look when I walked in, and I just ignored him and started walking up the stairs, and I could hear him walking up behind me. I thought, okay, maybe he's going to the law offices on the 2nd floor, but then he followed me. So this man followed me up the stairs, and when I got to my apartment door, I turned around, and I was like, what are you doing? He was like, I thought you were leading me to my massage. And I was like, ew, no, the massage parlor's in the basement. He was like, so you don't work here? And I was like, no. And this was the creepiest part. He goes, well, that's too bad. And then he walked away. So later that day, I go for a run. And other than our sketchy apartment building, the rest of the street was really residential and nice. One of our neighbors, Peter, was gardening out front. And he said hi, and he asked how I liked living in our new place, and I said it was fine. And then I asked if he knew anything about the massage parlor, and he didn't really answer my question, but responded in a really weird way. He was like, a lot of people have been living on this street for a long time, and some are friends, and some aren't. And then he walked away, and I was like, whoa. Did Peter just explain to me how a neighborhood works? Obviously, Peter didn't answer my question at all, and I was still really creeped out by the massage parlor. Then a few days later, I was walking home from school, and all of a sudden I hear the sound of leaves crackling behind me, like the sound of footsteps. And I turn around, and it's the same man from the apartment building.
Top 5. Okay, so around 2 summers ago, me and my sister were just chilling in our room watching YouTube. My dad was in his room watching TV. And me and my sister haven't left our room in like maybe 2 hours. We were about to go to bed. And then my dad just starts calling our name. He's like, Ashley, Kayla, get over here. I'm like, bro, what? So we go into his room and he's like, which one of you just went into the kitchen? Me and my sister look at each other. We're like, none of us went in the kitchen. And he looks at us. He goes, yeah, one of you went into the kitchen. I know you did. And me and my sister look at each other and we're like, we have been in our rooms the whole time. So my dad grabs his gun and he looks around the house. There's nobody there. So I'm like, yo, what did you see? Like, what did you see? And he was like, I saw a tall black figure walk into the kitchen. Kind of like what I saw in my mirror. So I go back to my room, I shut my door, and I try to go to bed. Around 11 o'clock, everybody in my house got woken up to a huge shatter from downstairs. I got up, my heart was in my stomach because I thought someone broke in because it sounded like a window breaking. My dad grabs his gun and we all go downstairs. And my lizard's 20-pound cage was on the floor broken.
Storytime Tinder edition. Okay, the story blew up on Twitter like a while ago, but I'm just gonna retell it because it's very informational. So there was this guy and this girl, and they met through Tinder, and then they met up and they went on a date. And they were out at dinner, and then she starts not feeling so well. And then she says, I really need to go home. And he says, yeah, I'll drive you home. And she says, okay. So then they get to her house, and then she starts feeling better. So then she says, do you want to come in for some coffee? And then he says, yeah, sure. So they go inside, they have their coffee, and then she doesn't feel well again. And she's like, oh, I'm sorry, I don't feel well again. I think you really need to leave. And he's like, okay. And he leaves. And then she goes to bed, and in the middle of the night, she wakes up, and she hears this noise down in her kitchen. And so she locks her door, and she calls the cops. And the 911 operator is just on the other line saying, can you just stay on the line until the cops get there? And then the cops get there, and they're like, the door is locked. Like, we don't think anyone's inside. And she's like, I promise you, someone's inside my house. I can hear them. She says, you have my permission to break down the door. So she's still up in her room, and then she hears the cops break down the door. And then she hears some rustling and some fighting. Part two of the Tinder story. So then after the cops break down the door, they go upstairs and they knock on her door and they're like, it's okay, we've got the guy, everything's fine. And they say to her, we don't really want you to stay here tonight. We don't think that you should see what he's done. And when I say he, it's the guy that she went on a date with. And she's like, no, I need to see what he's done. So she goes downstairs and she sees her kitchen wrapped all in plastic. And there's a saw and a hammer and a knife. And earlier when he came into her house for coffee, he set his keys down right next to her keys. And so when he left, he picked up both sets of keys. And that is how he got back into her house. And they tested her, like her blood and everything, and she wasn't supposed to wake up because of how many drugs were in her system, because on the date, he drugged her. And then I guess he was just planning on chopping up her body in her own kitchen. I don't know. Stay safe.
My house has a huge glass window in the front of it that shines in moonlight at night. And a few nights after my dad saw the shadow figure, I had my friend Olivia come over to watch movies. It's around 9 o'clock at night, my dad's out at a bar. I'm over here making popcorn, and I hear my friend scream. So I go over to her, and she points out on the floor the shadow of somebody hanging from a noose swinging back and forth. I immediately start looking for something that could cause that shadow, but there was nothing. And every time you look at the floor, you'd see a shadow of somebody swinging back and forth on a noose. So my sister tries to calm us down and takes us down to the basement to watch a movie. Around 5 seconds later, the Alexa went off talking about a murder. So we run upstairs, we lock my door, and we just sit in there. My dad eventually got home, so we calmed down and we tried to go to bed. But around 3 hours later, my dog, who never barks, started barking at the wall. Tell me that shit ain't crazy, but as always, it gets worse. Okay, this one isn't long, but it definitely adds to the paranormal. So this one time I was hanging out with this kid. And I was out like an hour past my curfew, but I didn't really care because I thought my dad was asleep. So I pull up to my house and this kid's like, your dad's awake. I was like, there's no way he's awake. He has to get up at 3 a.m. and it's 10 p.m. He's like, no, I just saw someone standing outside the window and walk away. So I'm like, okay, great, I'm gonna get my ass beat. So I go inside, I'm ready to get yelled at, and I don't see my dad. So I go into his room, and this man is passed out snoring. So I was a little freaked out because my dad was asleep, so who did he see? So it's either a man living in my attic, or it might be a little ghost. So one night, I was getting ready to go to bed. And for some reason, I've never had this feeling before in my life. I was so hungry, I couldn't even keep my eyes closed. And I was like, okay, wow, I didn't know I was that hungry. So I go out to the kitchen, and I'm getting some snacks. And I always check the front door because it's low-key glass, so I always see if somebody's standing out there because I'm a little paranoid bitch. And of course, this one time, there is somebody standing outside my front door at 12 a.m. And guess who it was? It was my schizophrenic neighbor, Ralph. So as soon as I see him, I run behind my fridge because it blocks me from the front door. And I keep peeking over there and he's literally just fucking standing there. And this man would not move. So I'm still sitting behind the fridge and my door has a thing, it's a digital thing so you could hear the deet 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 when someone's trying to get in. So I was like, oh fucking great, my neighbor's trying to break into my house. So he keeps trying to get the code right for about 2 minutes and then eventually I just hear nothing. So I peer back around and he is completely fucking gone. And he didn't come back for the rest of the night, but it only gets... Top 5. Okay, so around 2 summers ago, me and my sister were just chilling in our room watching YouTube. My dad was in his room watching TV. And me and my sister haven't left our room in maybe 2 hours. We were about to go to bed. And then my dad just starts calling our name. He's like, Ashley, Kayla, get over here. I'm like, bro, what? So we go into his room and he's like, which one of you just went into the kitchen? Me and my sister look at each other. We're like, none of us went in the kitchen. And he looks at us. He goes, yeah, one of you went into the kitchen. I know you did. And me and my sister look at each other and we're like, we have been in our rooms the whole time. So my dad grabs his gun and he looks around the house. There's nobody there. So I'm like, yo, what did you see? What did you see? And he was like, I saw a tall black figure walk into the kitchen. Kind of like what I saw in my mirror. So I go back to my room, I shut my door, and I try to go to bed. Around 11 o'clock, everybody in my house got woken up to a huge shatter from downstairs. I got up, my heart was in my stomach because I thought someone broke in because it sounded like a window breaking. My dad grabs his gun and we all go downstairs. And my lizard's 20-pound cage was on the floor broken.
Yes, this really did happen. In 2015, a man woke up to a strange post-it note sitting on his desk. On it was a to-do list that he didn't recognize in handwriting that didn't look like his. Since he was up late the night before doing some work, he assumed he must have written out the list when he was half asleep and kind of forgot about it, so he just crumples it up and throws it away. 2 weeks later, he wakes up to dozens of these post-it notes all over his wall, and they're all blank except for one that, in the same weird handwriting, says, "Our landlord isn't letting me talk to you." Now feeling totally freaked out that some crazy person is crawling around his apartment at night, he starts looking for signs of a break-in, but there aren't any. Instead of calling the police, he shares his experience on Reddit asking for help, and one user's comment literally saves his life. Turns out the man was writing the notes to himself and then forgetting because his brain was slowly dying due to a carbon monoxide leak that was only discovered because a user suggested he install a detector. If someone offers you this, walk away. In 2016, a man was staying at his friend's cabin in the woods when he decided to go for an evening stroll. A little ways down the trail, he hears someone call out from behind his neighbor's house. He looks up and he sees this skinny guy pop out from behind the building who starts waving frantically at him to come over. Worried this guy could be in trouble, the man takes off running to assist. But when he gets close enough, the neighbor just offers him a fistful of Slim Jims and starts talking about how much he hates his wife. Sensing there was something wrong with this guy, he says no thank you to the Slim Jims and walks away. The next day, the man calls his friend who owned the cabin to ask him what the deal was with his weirdo neighbor. There was silence on the phone, and then his friend just says, "I don't have any neighbors." The police are called, and it turns out his neighbor was really some lunatic who had recently killed his wife and had been hiding out in the abandoned cabin next door.
This is part 2 of my true scary childhood story about the people that lived inside of my walls. No, they were not real people, they were obviously ghosts. I would constantly hear tapping coming from the other side of my wall. I'd be woken up in the middle of the night to people pacing back and forth from inside of my wall. But my dad just kept telling me it's just rats. I was woken up at 3 a.m. one night to tapping coming from the inside of my wall. That night, I decided to be brave and tap back. I tapped 3 times. And you better believe 3 taps came right back at me. I was so scared. I didn't believe it, so I tapped 4 times. And guess what? 4 taps came right back at me. I ran upstairs screaming, mortified about what just happened. But once again, my parents didn't believe me. I probably shouldn't have communicated with the spirits because after that, things started to get really bad really quick. I'm out of time, but stay tuned for part 3 and follow my Instagram that's linked down below. This is part 3 of the people who lived inside of my walls. No, they were not real people. They were obviously ghosts. But as I was saying before, I tried to communicate with the spirits by tapping on the wall. And every single time I would tap, they would tap right back. After I started communicating with them, things started to get bad really quickly. I would wake up in the middle of the night and all my blankets would be all the way across the room. There were engraved scratch marks on my door, and they just kept appearing every single day. I woke up in the middle of the night one time to someone literally standing over me. I screamed so loud and the thing just disappeared. My parents finally believed me when one morning I woke up to 3 long scratch marks going down my back. They moved me upstairs into a new room and turned my old room into a guest bedroom. Whenever we have guests over though, they all tell us that they hear the tapping. And I know exactly what they're talking about. Thank you for listening and please follow my Instagram. I'm going to be telling you a true scary childhood story. On the backside of my house, we had an old tornado shelter. Nobody had ever been in it because when we moved in, the realtor told us not to go down there because there was a lot of mold. But because I was a child who loved to explore things, and I was also not scared to get in trouble, I decided one day that me and my neighbor were going to go down into the tornado shelter. When we finally got the tornado shelter opened, my neighbor was way too scared to go down. So I decided to take one for the team and go down there. Because I had a huge imagination as a child, I thought that when I would go down there, I'd find something super cool that would give me superpowers. But instead of finding something super cool, the room was empty. Until I looked into the corner and I saw a little boy sitting there. He was just staring at me. I got so scared, so I ran up the stairs and ran into my house. I told my parents and they went down there and he wasn't there. He just vanished. Stay tuned for part 2. This is part 2 of my true scary childhood story about the little boy in the tornado shelter. After I saw the little boy, I got so scared and ran up the stairs to tell my parents. When they went down there to see what I was talking about, the little boy was just gone. It was almost like he had vanished into thin air. My mom then told me to never go down there again. But of course I didn't listen to her and I went down there the very next day. The moment I went down there, I saw the little boy again. He looked super sweet and really scared, so I decided to just try to talk to him. I asked him what his name was and he said his name was Adam. Then I asked him why he was down there and he said he lived down there. And then being the curious child I was, I asked him where his parents were. And his reply was they were dead. I then asked him if he wanted to come eat dinner with us, and he said he couldn't leave. I was so confused. I asked him why he was down there, and then he just went silent. Like this video if you want a part 3. I'm going to be telling you a true scary childhood story about the people that lived inside of my walls. No, they were not real people. They were obviously ghosts. But as a child, it was pretty scary. We moved into a new house when I was 6 years old. It was an old house. A lot of things needed to be updated on it. It was also out in the middle of nowhere. There were 2 basement rooms and I was put in one of them. The first night that we lived there, I heard scratching coming from the wall. I told my dad the next day and he assured me it was just rats and that we needed to get it fixed. He had an exterminator come out the very next day. But the exterminator didn't find anything. The exterminator set up some rat traps just in case. The scratching didn't stop though. It was loud. It almost sounded like something was trying to get out of the wall from the other side. One night I was woken up and it sounded like someone was pacing back and forth coming from the inside of my wall. I was so scared, but no one believed me. My dad kept telling me it's just rats. Stay tuned for part 2.
So as a kid, me and my family would go to the beach like almost every day, and there was always this creepy old man just sitting down. So one day the creepy old man called me little girl in the pink shirt, and I would always go talk to him, but one day it all changed when he randomly called me by my name. This is a fake name I'm using, Layla. And I looked at him with fear in my eyes because I never told him my name. I walked up to him and said yes. He looked at me and said, "Let's go for a walk." By the way, my parents look at him as an old man that was enjoying his retirement. So we go for a walk and he says, "So Layla, how is it back at home?" I tell him good. Then he started asking me weird questions like the school I went to, my address, all type of weird things. So I responded with I don't know. Then my parents started to call my name because they were looking for me. So the creepy old man let me go before I started to walk. I asked him what his name was, and he gives me his fake name. This is the fake name this sender is using, Bob Lakewood. Walked to my parents, we went home. I told my parents the whole thing, so they searched up his name, and right there, the first thing that popped up was Bob Lakewood wanted for murder for 2 young girls in Canada. My mom freaked out. So the next day, we went to the beach with an undercover cop. The cop immediately recognized the man and immediately handcuffed him. Later, the cop tells my mom that this man has killed over 10 little girls, and I was going to be his next victim. So I would be dead if I never told my parents what happened.
This is why you should never Google yourself. Some of us might have done it once or twice, but for Honora Petrova, one simple search led to horrifying consequences. Honora had always wanted to be an ice skater. She was young, talented, successful, and had a famous trainer. The night before her first big championship win, she felt more anxious than usual. For fun, she Googled herself and came across a Wikipedia page saying that she would win. When she did win, Honora thought this must be a coincidence. But every time after that, the page would predict whether she won or lost. She checked it every single time, almost addicted to refreshing that site. When she was about to compete in another huge competition, she decided to manipulate the website by changing the outcome it predicted. But instead, it said, Honora Petrova is going to get what she deserves. Right after, she was accused of sabotaging another girl's skates, which ended up slicing her in the forehead. Even though Honora denied it, she was banned from the competition and was dropped by her trainer. She thought this must be the worst of it until she checked the website the next day and saw a terrifying message about her. Follow for part 2 of the story. This is why you should never Google yourself. Honora Petrova became obsessed with constantly refreshing a website that predicted whether or not she would win her ice skating competitions. But things took an extreme turn when she decided to manipulate the website's predictions by editing it herself. This caused her to be banned from the competition and be dropped by her trainer. But things got so much worse when she refreshed the page again and saw a terrifying message about her. This time, it said she would be an orphan. She immediately called her parents, but she only heard maniacal laughter over the phone. After her parents died of a terrible accident, the police said that there were no records of her calls to her parents at all. She became reclusive after that and moved to another country, where she tried to reinvent herself. Eventually, she stopped checking the website and things went back to normal, until she wanted to audition for the ice circus. She checked the website again to see whether or not she would make it, but it only said one thing. It said, at midnight, Honora Petrova died friendless and alone. The next day, her body was found next to her computer. This is why you should never go to a stranger's house alone. There was once a boy named Bryce who loved raisins. He loved them so much that he wanted to impress his high school crush, Jenny, with his homemade raisins. He thought it was more satisfying to make his own. His raisins didn't have any preservatives. He just left them outside and let the sun do its work. The smell was his favorite part. He invited Jenny to his house and was so excited when she accepted. At first, Jenny thought it was strange that Bryce was so into raisins, but she brushed it off as a unique hobby. Jenny arrived at Bryce's home. After a while, she then turned to Bryce and said, "Where are the raisins? Show me where you make them." Bryce motioned for her to follow him into the backyard. As soon as she entered, she let out a horrified scream. Bryce regretted what he did next. He just wanted her to stop screaming, so he took the nearby rock and hit her on the head until it stopped. He didn't realize that when he told Jenny he loved to make raisins, she thought that he meant those dried up grapes. But why waste the body now? Bryce decided he would turn Jenny into a raisin. So he carried her body and laid her down in the yard next to all the others. This is why you should always pay attention to details. A woman was brushing her hair when she found a little bump at the back of her head, so she called her husband to have him check it out for her. He said it looks like a button. It's small, round, hairless, and flat at the top. He joked around it with her, asking, "What do you think would happen if I pressed it?" Then he did, and the woman instantly leaned up and gave him a kiss. Then the husband kept pressing it as a joke, but something went wrong. It seemed like he pressed it all too many times, and a cool numbness spread down the woman's neck, around her arms and her legs. Her eyes automatically shut and her vision went black. A while later, the woman woke up and learned that she had fainted. The husband kept apologizing with tears in his eyes as if it was all his fault. Eventually, they both went about their lives and tried to forget about this incident, but the woman just couldn't, because afterwards, she came across a photo of her family in the living room. It was a photo of her and her husband's wedding propped up on a ceramic urn. She looked closer at the photo of her own face. She's smiling as if she's the happiest girl in the world. But there's a small scar under her left eyebrow, a scar that she now didn't have. Has anyone ever told you not to do something and that just made you want to do it more? For these three girls, their curiosity would lead to something terrifying. These girls went to high school together, and one night they decided to have a sleepover. They were also fans of horror movies, so they thought it would be nice to rent one out and watch it. They eventually found a video rental store on the street corner and went inside. They would soon regret this decision. They asked a woman behind the counter if she had any suggestions for horror movies that they could watch. The woman said she had the perfect movie for them and went into the back room. Then one of the girls noticed that an old and rusted videotape was lying on the counter. She picked it up and was instantly curious, but things got intense when the woman came back. She slammed her hands down on the old videotape and pulled it away. She said, "That's not something you should be watching." The woman wouldn't say anything else, only that it was a home movie. Then she handed them a regular horror movie. The girls agreed to rent that one out instead, but one of the girls was still too curious. She wanted to know what was in that old tape, so when the woman wasn't looking, she put it in her purse and left with it. When the girls came home, they decided to watch the old tape together, but what they saw on there would both shock and terrify them.
Part 2 of why ladies should always be cautious while driving alone at nighttime. And if a random car starts following you, to never drive home. So like I said, I noticed this random car following me, so I didn't drive home. I parked into some random driveway and the same car that was following me drove right past me. I waited a little bit to see if I was in the clear, and I see that same car driving right back towards my direction. That's when I duck. I basically try to make it seem like I went inside, even though it's not really my house. Well, he ends up parking right behind my car, and he gets out of his car. At this point, I was terrified, but at least I was in my car so I could run him over if need be. And thankfully, I have tinted windows, so when he walked past my car, he didn't see me because I was ducking. I didn't really get to see his face or what he was wearing. He basically looked like a black figure. Like I said, it was really dark outside. Whoever's house I was didn't keep their front porch lights on. Thankfully. Then maybe he would have seen me. Well, he gets to the front porch. That's when I immediately get up, turn my car back on, and drive home. Well, the next morning, I was woken up by someone ringing my doorbell. Look outside and I see the same car from last night parked in my driveway. Part 3 of why ladies should always be cautious while driving alone at nighttime. Like I said, I was able to get away from whoever was following my car last night. Well, the next morning, someone was ringing my doorbell, so I woke up. I look outside my window because my bedroom window is right at the front of my house. And I see the same car that was following me last night parked in my driveway. I didn't know what to do at this point, but I thought that I should at least try to see what he looks like. So I go to my door and I look through that little peephole. And I say I almost passed away. It is not an exaggeration. It was my date from last night. I swing open my door and I'm like, motherfucker, how did you find me? I didn't give you my address. I straight up confront him. I'm not playing around. I said, were you following me last night? He goes, oh, I just forgot to get your number. At the moment I was thinking he could be telling the truth because we did only talk through that online dating app. We never exchanged numbers. So I went ahead and gave him my number and didn't think much of it. That was a big mistake. The next day I woke up to 200 missed calls and 50 texts from part 4 of why ladies should be cautious while driving home alone at nighttime. So my date shows up to my house, aka the dude that was following me last night, and says that he was following me because he never got to get my number. Low-key believed him because we never did exchange numbers. I kinda thought it was a little cute. He would follow me just to get my number. At the time I wasn't really thinking that he could have just like texted me on the dating app for my number. But yeah, I should have never gave him my number. Because when I woke up the next day, I had 200 missed calls and 50 texts from him. So I start reading the texts, and it was not an emergency. It was actually a nightmare. Text read something along the lines of, text me back right now, where the hell are you? I need you. Call me back or I swear to God. Well, I didn't even bother replying. But as the day went on, he kept texting me and he kept calling me. The texts turned into threats. I was thinking about just blocking him. Then I remembered since he followed me and I drove home, he knew my address. Part 5 of why ladies should always be cautious while driving alone at night. Like I said, I gave my date my phone number. Then the next morning, I woke up to a bunch of spam texts and calls from him. Basically just saying things like, call me back right now. I need you. Text me back. And then his text started getting worse. He started saying things like, if you don't text me back, I'm gonna kill you. I was thinking about blocking him, but I didn't want to make him mad because he knew where I lived. I show his messages and all his calls to my girlfriend. They just told me to go to the police. One of my really good friends came over and took me to the police station because she didn't want me leaving my house by myself. Well, when we got there, they told us that they couldn't even do anything because he hadn't committed a crime yet. And that the threats that he sent me just weren't enough to make a case. Well, I did end up blocking him. I blocked his number and I blocked him on the online dating site. Basically moved in with my friend. It's been like a week now and I haven't really went home. My girlfriends and family are now helping me find a new place to stay. If there's any advice that anyone wants to give me, please leave it in
When I was in 6th grade, I went to go visit my little cousins at their house. Their house was right on the edge of these woods, and the woods were really thick, and our parents always told us not to go there. And one time I asked my mom why, and she said because when people do bad things, they sometimes go and hide in the woods. I was staying at my cousin's house for a week on this one trip, and whenever I was bored, I would go look out the window and watch the woods. Usually it was pretty boring, and I would just be staring at trees, but one day it was like 5 p.m. and the sun was setting, so it was getting dark, and I saw something moving in the woods. I told my uncle, and he said it was probably just an animal, and I told him no, it was tall and looked like a skinny lady. And he said I have a creative imagination and it was probably just a deer. But then a few minutes later, I heard my aunt and uncle whispering in the kitchen. My aunt was talking about a woman from the psychiatric hospital in their town who had escaped. Their house was like 15 minutes away from a maximum security psychiatric hospital for criminals with mental illness. And then they saw me listening to them in the doorway and they stopped talking completely. A few days later, in the middle of the night, I heard a noise.
This is why you should be careful working in food delivery. When the pandemic hit, I lost my job and signed up to work for a food delivery app.
I was making good money and the tips were nice too. During the first few months of working, I never had any weird experiences or customers. For the most part, everything was fine. There were times when I was a little scared of dropping off the food because it was in sketchy neighborhoods or it was dark outside, but nothing ever happened. I started feeling confident in my position and I let my guard down. One night, I got a delivery request and the tip was bigger than the total order. When I looked at the details of how to drop it off, I realized why the tip was so big. The instructions asked if I could open the door and bring it inside of the house as they were bedbound and unable to walk the door. I knew I shouldn't do it. It was super against company policy, but I had an aunt who was bedbound and it hit a soft spot. When I opened the door of the house, I was hit with the most vile stench that's ever hit my nose. I looked around and called out to the customer. It was silent for a few seconds. Suddenly, someone croaked out, "I'm back here, come on down." The voice came from a bedroom down the hallway that was pitch black. As I walked towards the room, my stomach was turning. I entered the room and put the order down, but I didn't see anyone. When I turned around to leave, suddenly a man appeared.
This is why you should never talk to strangers in an elevator. One day, a surgeon was working the night shift at a hospital. He just finished his operation on a patient and was going to the basement. He entered the elevator and there was one other woman already inside. They were casually chatting when the elevator door opened and another woman was about to enter. But the surgeon looked horrified. He quickly slammed the close button and punched the highest floor of the building. Surprised, the woman asked why he was being so rude and wouldn't let the other woman in the elevator with them. The surgeon explained that in this hospital, all patients wear white wristbands with their names printed on them, but the red wristbands are placed on all of the corpses. The surgeon then looks to the woman in the elevator with him and says, "That was the same woman I just operated on. She died on the operating table. Didn't you see the red wristband she was wearing?" The woman in the elevator with him just smiled, raised her arm, and said, "You mean like this one?"
Part 2, why you need a security system for your house. The house had 2 bedrooms on either hallway and a bathroom. The bedroom doors were closed, but the bathroom door was creaked open. I was so lucky in that moment because he sprinted to the bathroom. That gave me just enough time to open the attic access in my closet and pull myself up. As I lifted myself, I heard the person run towards my room. I had just pulled my feet inside when my bedroom door burst open. He walked in and stopped. When he didn't see me, he went and checked the other room, then came back and turned on the light. A moment later, he ripped open my closet door. After a few seconds, he stepped away and I heard a loud crash come from my room, followed by a scream of frustration and anger. Then he went downstairs. I had left my phone when I ran for the closet and wasn't sure I could climb down without him hearing. After some time, the noises stopped. I counted to 1,000, then climbed down to call the police. My bed had been flipped, furniture knocked over, and all my things destroyed. The only thing missing was a knife from my kitchen. The police found that the side door had been forced open by a crowbar. They also found cigarette butts and an empty tube used for drugs. They think he had been watching the house for a while. I installed some security on the house after this. I can't imagine what would have happened if he had come to my room first.
So I had gotten a crush on the quiet kid at school, and I invited him over. And things started to get weird when I cut my knee open and he licked the blood off my knee and said that it tasted good. So anyways, we're in our kitchen and we're just making food. And he's petting my dog, telling me how much he loves my dog. And I turn around for 2 seconds. And I wish to God I can make this up. I turn around and he has a knife to my dog's neck. And I'm like, what the hell are you doing? And he's like, oh, I'm just joking with you, ha 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 ha. So I grabbed the knife from him and I put it back where it belongs and I'm like, okay, let's go out on my trampoline. Reminder, at this point, it was pitch black outside. So we're jumping on my trampoline when I feel something hit me in the face. So I look at him and then he starts beating me up. And I'm not talking play fighting. This kid is genuinely beating me up. So I'm standing there in shock when he gives me another whack to the face and I fall to the floor.
If you're ever studying late at night, don't do what she did. One night, a girl was studying alone in the library. It was around 2 in the morning, so she was getting pretty tired. But as soon as she shifted her books around, she noticed something strange. It was a website URL written on the desk. This made her curious, so she went on one of the computers in the library and typed in the website. But what she saw sent chills down her spine. It was a photo of a woman walking down a busy street, but it looked like it was taken from a distance, and the woman didn't know that she was being photographed. This made the girl feel uneasy, so she shut down the computer, grabbed her things, and left. But the next day, she became more curious. She thought it must be some kind of a joke, but she was too tired to notice, so she went back and typed in the website again. But this time, the image had turned into something terrifying. It was the same woman lying on the floor with a knife in her chest. The girl shut off the computer and called the police. After the call, she opened the computer again, but the photo had changed. It was now a photo of a girl in a library, taken from the back. It was a photo of her looking at the website. Underneath the photo was the caption, "You are my next internet star."